Today's capital industrial projects are complex. There's lots of moving pieces, and without a structured process or plan to complete projects, it's pretty tough for projects to work out in the end during on-site testing. There's, of course, a phase to get everything installed, but a systems-based approach is required to get projects completed, and this often gets missed on projects or is planned very late in the planning cycle, too late for construction groups to properly plan the completion of their work, leading to a scramble at the end of projects. A systems-based approach is definitely required if commissioning is to be successful at the end. I wrote a deep dive article into a systems-based approach, and I've used Google's Notebook LM to dive deep into how a systems-based approach will work on your projects. Have a listen.
You're listening to the Industrial Commissioning Association podcast, where we discuss best practices for industrial plant process and energy system commissioning. Get ready to say no to outdated industry norms and say yes to improved project performance. Here's your host, Paul Turner.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Deep Dive. Today we're going to dig into something that can really make or break a project, commissioning.
Yeah.
We often hear these project management buzzwords, but this one I think is really worth exploring. And you've sent over some really insightful material about how to use a systems-based approach to make sure commissioning goes well.
Absolutely. And, the source that we're looking at here really emphasizes that traditional project management, while great for getting things started, often kind of falls short at the end.
At the finish line.
Okay, so I get that planning and execution are super important, but why is the finish so often overlooked? It's not like we're just slapping on a coat of paint and calling it a day.
Well, the problem is that, like you said, planning and execution, those are kind of the stars of the show, right?
Yeah, right.
Traditional project management training focuses so much on, individual tasks and milestones that it often neglects the big picture. Okay.
Of how all those pieces come together to actually form a functioning system.
Yeah.
And the author uses a really interesting example to kind of drive this home.
Okay.
They passed the PMP exam.
Oh, wow.
Which is a big deal.
Yeah, big deal.
In the project management world, but realized even with all that knowledge, they still felt completely unprepared.
Wow.
To handle the complexities of actually completing a project and making sure everything worked together as it should.
So it's almost like you've got all these ingredients,
but
no recipe.
Exactly.
So you could just end up with this pile of stuff that doesn't really come together.
Yeah, you're not going to have a delicious meal at the end.
Yeah. And then in terms of project, that means like cost overruns, delays, frustration, all of that.
Exactly. And that's where this idea of a systems-based approach to commissioning comes in.
Okay.
It's really about shifting our thinking from that kind of checklist mentality to a more holistic view, where we're considering the entire system from the very beginning.
But wouldn't that add like a ton of complexity up front? I mean, projects are already pretty complex as is.
Yeah, that's a common misconception.
Okay.
It does require some upfront planning.
Yeah.
But a systems-based approach actually simplifies things in the long run.
Okay.
Think about building a house.
Mm-hmm.
In a traditional approach, you might just focus on, finishing one room at a time.
Right.
Get the drywall up,
Yeah.
paint on the walls, fixtures installed.
Makes sense.
But what if you haven't even considered how the electrical wiring in that room
Yeah.
connects to the overall electrical system for the whole house?
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
So you could end up having to rip out perfectly good drywall later on to fix a wiring issue that could have been avoided
Exactly.
if you'd thought about it up front.
Exactly.
So in the systems-based approach, you're essentially thinking about how all those systems, electrical, plumbing, HVAC, will work together from the very beginning.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And the source argues that this kind of thinking
Yeah.
needs to be baked into the project from day one.
Okay, so let's say I'm on board with this whole systems-based thinking.
Yeah.
Where do I even start?
Well, the key is to involve commissioning experts early on. Ideally during those planning and design phases.
Okay.
And this is where things get really interesting.
Okay.
The source suggests that this involvement shouldn't just be, informal conversations. It should be formalized in contracts.
Oh, wow.
So that everyone is literally on the same page from the get-go.
Yeah.
and there are fewer surprises down the road.
Okay, but I'm going to play devil's advocate for a second.
Sure.
Bringing in these specialized experts early on, wouldn't that add a significant cost to the project?
It's an investment, for sure.
Yeah.
But the source makes a really compelling argument that any upfront costs are totally dwarfed by the potential savings down the line.
Okay.
Think about it. If you catch a design flaw during the planning phase,
right,
it's a relatively simple fix.
Easy.
But if that same flaw is discovered during construction, or worse, after the project's supposed to be finished, the costs of rework can be astronomical.
That's a nightmare.
Yeah.
So this early involvement isn't just about avoiding problems, it's about setting the entire project up for success.
Exactly. It's about creating a smoother, more efficient process where everyone understands the big picture and how their work contributes to it.
And it sounds like the source is saying that this isn't just for massive construction projects either?
No, absolutely not.
Okay.
The principles apply to any project where different components or systems need to work together seamlessly. So whether you're developing software, launching a marketing campaign, or even organizing a large event, taking a systems-based approach to commissioning can help ensure that that finished product is truly greater than the sum of its parts.
This is so interesting. So we've established that early involvement is key, but I'm guessing there's more to this systems-based approach than just bringing in experts early on.
Yeah.
What are some of the other key elements?
One of the things that the source really emphasizes is the importance of communication.
Okay.
And I'm not talking about just casual conversations.
Right.
But a very deliberate and documented approach to communication that keeps everyone aligned throughout the entire project life cycle.
So it's about having a clear and transparent process for how information is shared, how decisions are made, and how changes are managed.
Precisely. And this is where technology can play a huge role.
Oh, okay.
The source talks about, the increasing use of digital platforms and tools that can really facilitate communication track progress and ensure that everyone has access to the most up-to-date information.
Makes sense, because if you're trying to keep track of everything with like emails and spreadsheets, that could be a recipe for disaster. So we've got early expert involvement, robust communication. What else is crucial?
Documentation.
Documentation.
Absolutely critical.
Okay.
And I'm not just talking about the technical specs and blueprints. The source stresses the importance of documenting that entire commissioning process.
Okay.
Including decisions made, changes implemented, and any issues that arise along the way.
So it's like creating this comprehensive record that you can refer to at any point during the project and even after it's done.
Exactly.
This not only helps with accountability, but also provides valuable insights for future projects.
Exactly. It's about learning from every project.
Yeah.
And continuously improving your processes.
I like that continuous improvement. So we've talked a lot about the why of a systems-based approach to commissioning, but I'm really curious to understand how this plays out in the real world. What does it actually look like? To shift from that traditional check-the-box project management to this more holistic, systems-focused approach.
Well, the source uses a really compelling analogy from the construction industry to highlight this shift.
Okay.
They talk about how construction projects often get bogged down in what they call an area-focused approach.
What does that mean?
It means that the focus is on completing one room or section at a time.
Okay.
Which on the surface makes sense.
Yeah.
Especially when you're thinking about like managing labor and materials efficiently.
Right.
But the problem is this approach doesn't always translate well when you're dealing with complex systems that need to work together seamlessly.
Okay, so it's like assembling a puzzle.
Right.
But only focusing on finishing those individual pieces.
Yeah.
Without really considering how they all fit into the overall picture.
Exactly.
You might end up with a bunch of completed sections.
Right.
But not an actual functioning whole.
Exactly. And the source argues that this is where traditional project management often stumbles.
Okay.
They use the example of a power plant where you have all these intricate systems, electrical mechanical control systems that need to be perfectly integrated for the plant to operate safely and efficiently.
Makes sense.
And if you're just focused on completing one area at a time, you risk overlooking those critical connections and interdependencies between those different systems.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
It's like building a car by focusing on just finishing the engine, the transmission, and the body separately
without
thinking about how they all connect and work together.
Exactly.
You might end up with a beautiful car that looks great in the showroom, but won't actually run.
That's a great analogy. And what's really fascinating is how the source proposes we tackle this challenge.
Okay.
They're not just advocating for a change in mindset.
Right.
They're suggesting a fundamental shift in how projects are structured from the very beginning.
Okay. I'm intrigued.
Yeah.
What kind of shift?
Well, they actually recommend including specific systematization details.
Oh, okay.
How those systems will be integrated and commissioned right in the initial project contracts.
Wow, that's a bold move.
It is?
It's like saying we're not just building a building, we're building a system.
Yeah.
And here's exactly how we're going to make sure that system works.
Exactly. And think about the benefits of that clarity up front.
Yeah.
Everyone involved, from the architects and the engineers to the construction crews and the commissioning teams, they're literally all on the same page from day one.
Right.
They understand how their work fits into that big picture.
Yeah.
And they can anticipate potential issues before they even arise.
That sounds like a dream scenario for any project manager.
I know.
So by embedding these systematization details in the contract, you're basically creating this roadmap for success from the very beginning.
That's the idea. Yeah. And the source argues that this upfront clarity not only streamlines the construction process, but also makes that transition to commissioning much smoother.
Makes sense.
You know, remember all those horror stories we hear about
Yeah.
commissioning teams being brought in at the last minute?
Yeah.
Only to discover a whole host of problems that could have been avoided with some upfront planning.
Yeah, that's a recipe for disaster.
Yeah.
Blown budgets. Missed deadlines.
Exactly. And this is where a systems-based approach really shines.
Okay.
By involving those commissioning experts early on.
Yeah.
And integrating those systemization details into the contract.
Right.
You're essentially building in quality and efficiency from the ground up.
I'm starting to see the real power of this approach.
Yeah.
It's not just about ticking boxes and meeting deadlines.
Right.
It's about creating a process that sets everyone up for success.
Yeah.
And ensures that the final product is truly greater than the sum of its parts.
And the source makes a really interesting point about the impact of this approach on the overall project experience.
Okay.
They argue that by fostering this sense of shared understanding and collaboration from the outset, you actually create a more enjoyable
Oh, wow.
and less stressful work environment.
That makes sense.
For everyone involved.
Yeah, because when everyone's on the same page and working towards a common goal,
Exactly.
there's less finger pointing, less frustration
Yeah.
when things inevitably don't go perfectly according to plan.
Exactly. It's like the difference between, trying to navigate a maze blindfolded versus having a map and a compass.
I like that.
Yeah. You're much more likely to reach your destination efficiently and without losing your sanity along the way.
I love that.
And that brings us to a really crucial aspect
Okay.
of this systems-based approach. The shift from a reactive mindset to a proactive one.
So instead of just putting out fires as they top up, they're actively anticipating potential challenges and addressing them collaboratively before they become major problems.
It's like preventative health care for your project.
Oh, I like that.
By identifying potential issues early on, you can develop solutions that are more effective and less disruptive in the long run.
This has been such an eye-opening conversation.
Yeah.
But before we wrap up, I'm curious to hear about some real-world examples of this approach in action.
Sure.
Are there any case studies that really highlight the tangible benefits of a systems-based approach to commissioning?
Absolutely. The source actually highlights several case studies from different industries that showcase how this approach has led to some remarkable outcomes.
Okay, let's hear it.
One example that really stood out to me was a case study involving a large hospital construction project.
Wow.
And they used a systems-based approach to commissioning for their HVAC system, which is obviously critical in a healthcare setting.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can only imagine the complexity.
of that system with all the requirements for ventilation, air filtration,
exactly,
temperature control.
And traditionally, commissioning for such a complex system would happen towards the end of the project.
Right.
Often resulting in delays and costly rework.
Yeah, trying to retrofit things after the fact never really works.
No, it doesn't.
But in this case, they decided to do things differently.
Right. They brought in commissioning experts during the design phase.
Oh, wow.
And integrated those system requirements into the project plans from the very beginning.
Okay.
And this allowed them to identify and address potential issues early on.
Yeah.
Things like ensuring that ductwork was properly sized.
Makes sense.
And that equipment was compatible with the building automation system.
So they were essentially building in that quality and efficiency from the ground up.
Precisely. And the result was that the HVAC system was commissioned on time and within budget.
Wow.
With minimal issues or delays.
It's amazing.
And more importantly, the hospital was able to open its doors to patients.
Right. Without any hiccups related to that critical HVAC system.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
That's a great example of how a systems-based approach can lead to tangible, real-world results.
Absolutely. And it's not just limited to construction projects.
Okay.
There's another case study highlighted in the source that involves a software development company.
Okay.
They were developing a complex enterprise resource planning system, or ERP system, with multiple modules that needed to seamlessly integrate with each other.
Oh, yeah. I can see how a systems-based approach would be invaluable in that kind of scenario.
Absolutely.
Where the interdependencies between those different modules are so critical.
Exactly. And by involving commissioning experts early on and focusing on system integration throughout that development process, they were able to deliver a highly functional and reliable software system that met the client's needs on time and within budget.
Sounds like this approach can really be applied to just about any project where you have multiple components or systems that need to work together seamlessly.
Absolutely. And the source emphasizes that these principles are universal.
Okay.
Regardless of the industry or the specific project type.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the world of systems-based commissioning, what are some key takeaways that our listeners should keep in mind?
Well, firstly, I think it's crucial to remember that commissioning is not just a final step or a box to be checked. It's an ongoing process that should be integrated into every stage of the project.
Okay. Yeah, I like that. And that early involvement of commissioning experts is not an added expense, but rather an investment that pays dividends in terms of efficiency, quality, and reduced risk.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
And don't forget about that human element.
Right.
Foster a collaborative culture where everyone understands that big picture and feels empowered to contribute their expertise.
That's where the real magic happens.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
It's funny, as we've been talking about this, it's really struck me that this approach, it's not just about the technical aspects of a project.
Right, the human element.
Yeah. The source actually talks about how this early involvement of commissioning experts, it can actually help break down those silos that often pop up between different teams.
Because suddenly you're not just like throwing designs over a wall to the construction team.
Right.
And then they just throw it.
Right, check it over to the next team.
Yeah, to the commissioning team at the end. It becomes a truly integrated process.
Right.
Where everyone is involved from the very beginning and understands not only the end goal, but how their individual piece contributes to it.
It's like that old saying, teamwork makes the dream work.
Yeah.
But in this case, it's not just about teamwork. It's about having that shared vision and understanding from the start.
And that shared understanding, that sense of ownership, can be incredibly powerful in terms of motivation and accountability.
The source even says that this approach can lead to a more enjoyable and less stressful project experience.
Absolutely.
For everyone.
It makes sense when you think about it.
Yeah.
When you're all on the same page.
Right.
Working together towards a common goal.
Yeah.
There's just less finger pointing and frustration.
Because it's going to happen when things inevitably go wrong.
Right.
It's like the difference between, trying to navigate a maze blindfolded versus having a map and a compass.
Right. You're much more likely to reach your destination.
Much more likely to not lose your sanity along the way.
Exactly.
And that brings us to a really crucial aspect of this systems-based approach.
Okay.
This shift from a reactive mindset to a proactive one.
So instead of just putting out fires as they pop up.
Right, constantly on defense.
Yeah, you're thinking ahead.
Yeah, being strategic.
You're anticipating potential challenges and addressing them before they become big problems.
I like that.
It's like preventative healthcare for your project.
Oh, I like that analogy.
Right.
So by identifying these potential issues early on, you can develop solutions that are more effective and less disruptive.
Exactly.
This has been so eye-opening.
Yeah, it's a fascinating approach.
But before we wrap up,
sure,
I'm curious to hear about some real-world examples.
Yeah.
You know, are there any case studies that really highlight the benefits?
Absolutely. The source actually provides several case studies from different industries that showcase how this approach has been used successfully.
Okay, let's hear.
One example that really stood out to me was a case study involving a large hospital construction project.
Wow, a hospital, that's...
Yeah, high stakes.
Yeah, mission critical.
Right. And they used a systems-based approach to commissioning their HVAC system.
Okay, so the ventilation, the air filtration,
all of that,
temperature control, all that stuff.
Exactly, which is obviously critical in a healthcare setting.
Absolutely, you don't want any issues with that.
Right, and traditionally, commissioning for a system that complex would happen towards the end of the project.
Right.
Often resulting in delays and costly rework.
Of course, because you're trying to fit it in after the fact.
Yeah, you got to make it work.
But in this case...
they decided to do things differently.
Okay.
They brought in commissioning experts during the design phase.
Wow, so early on.
Yeah, and integrated those system requirements into the project plans from the get-go.
Okay, that's great.
And this allowed them to, identify and address potential issues early on.
Like what kind of issues?
Well, for example, making sure that the ductwork was properly sized.
Okay.
And that all the equipment was compatible with the building automation system.
So they were really thinking about how everything was going to work together.
Exactly. And the result was that the HVAC system was commissioned on time and within budget.
Wow.
With very few issues or delays.
It's amazing.
And more importantly, the hospital was able to open its doors to patients without any problems related to the HVAC system.
Now that's a success story.
It is.
That's a great example of how this approach can lead to tangible, real-world results.
Absolutely. And it's not just limited to construction.
Okay.
The source highlights another case study. This time it's a software development company.
Okay. Interesting.
They were developing a complex ERP system.
Enterprise resource planning.
Right, with multiple modules that all needed to integrate seamlessly.
Oh, yeah. I can see how this approach would be really valuable in that kind of scenario.
Absolutely, because those interdependencies between the different modules are so critical.
If one breaks, they all break.
Exactly. And by involving commissioning experts early on and focusing on system integration throughout the development process, they were able to deliver a really functional and reliable software system.
And it sounds like they did it on time and within budget.
That's right. Met the client's needs and everything.
That's great.
So it just goes to show that this approach can be applied to pretty much any project.
Whether it's software or a hospital.
Right. As long as there are multiple components that need to work together.
It seems like the key takeaway here is that this systems-based approach is all about planning ahead.
Thinking about the big picture.
Collaborating.
And involving those commissioning experts from the very beginning.
This has been a fantastic deep dive.
It really has.
I think we've all learned a lot.
I know I have.
About how to approach projects
in
a more holistic and effective way.
Yeah. Thinking about those systems.
So to our listeners.
Yeah.
Whether you're leading a massive construction project or just tackling a complex task in your daily life, keep these principles in mind.
Absolutely.
Plan ahead. Think about the big picture. Collaborate. And don't be afraid to bring in the experts.
Couldn't agree more.
This has been another episode of The Deep Dive.
Thanks for having me.
We'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening. To become a member of the Industrial Commissioning Association, visit icxa.net. Members get access to commissioning standards, procurement specifications, commissioning training and certification, plus many more specialized resources to help you with commissioning of your industrial plant process and energy systems. Visit icxa.net for more information.